So as we're getting our seats, let me just say that it was fantastic, and thank you very much for giving us a dual example. And the example here is first one of entrepreneurship, because what you see, certainly within the Greek scene, is a remarkable entrepreneurship. And if you entrepreneurs think that you've got a difficult job trying to set up a new venture in any sector that you can think of, try innovating the way that the mayor of Trikala has, needing to deal with the stakeholders that are the Greek government, the policy, the polity around them. And I think that that takes quite a bit of stamina, and I for one, I'm quite impressed to see that. The panel that we've got with us today is going to expand a little bit on what we saw, because there's a second component to what Mayor Papastergiou showed us. It isn't just the ability of taking a city and transforming it, literally using this as an example of entrepreneurship. It also is creating the context that allows people to be more innovative and to be more open. And this is what we're going to be focusing on in our panel. It's going to be to think about the stuff that allows good ideas to turn into products. And we'll also touch on the question that we promised on the tin, which is where good ideas come from. Now, for that, in addition to Mayor Papastergiou, I'm delighted to introduce the other two panelists who have links at multiple levels in terms of that. So from left to right, it's a pleasure to welcome an old friend and co-author, Dean Francisco Veloso. And Francisco is notable not only because he's the dean of one of our main competitors here in London, Imperial Business School, but also because both there and in the previous place where he was dean, which is of the Católica University in Lisbon, and where he was before and still, I think, has close connections in Carnegie Mellon, was involved in entrepreneurship. And he brings the experience and engagement that Imperial has, and I should note that Imperial is now in an ambitious project of trying to leverage its strong base in science in order to enhance the links, and Francisco will be able to tell us a little bit more about that and about how Imperial wants to create the environment that will allow all of this knowledge to be turned into entrepreneurial output. But he's also been part of the Lisbon ecosystem. And you already heard about the Lisbon, and Portugal is a country that is structurally very similar to Greece. Its politics, unfortunately, for Greece, not quite like the Greek politics, but certainly the macroeconomics, the way that the crisis hit, and then the effort to change. He chairs the Business Angel Advisory Board in Lisbon still, and he can bring us his perspectives from Lisbon. And Ella, who I'm also delighted to have in the panel with us, who is one of our alumni, and who has founded Zinc, that is a really interesting incubator with a social mission. And it is not your standard incubator. It creates cohorts of people and gives us a fresh example of the way in which we can create the environment that will take raw talent and transform it into something that can be built into a business. So it'll be great to hear your views, not only in terms of what it is that you do in Zinc or what you try with NewCo to do in helping share the secrets, as it were, of innovating firms and communicate them to a broader audience, but perhaps to draw on the fact that you are a native of Tel Aviv. And the Israel ecosystem and the Tel Aviv entrepreneurial ecosystem has some interesting potential parallels where you can see how an ecosystem has been globally very successful, whereas Greece is struggling. But to me, even more interestingly, raises this question of the link of the diaspora. And I think that that goes right at the heart of what Reload Greece wants to do. because what we have seen in Tel Aviv and in Israel is an interesting model of leveraging the diaspora globally, and one of the things that we would like to do is perhaps think about emulating that. And we may return back to you, Dimitri, in asking about what you think we need to do to help create an environment that makes people think that change is possible. But let me start first by some questions on what is it that you are doing in order to support the entrepreneurial ideas. We'll return to the question of where entrepreneurial ideas come from in a moment. Let's start with the way of supporting them, and perhaps start with the more unusual example. So, Ella, I'm starting with you. Can you give us a sense in terms of what it is that you are doing in Zinc and what you think the value is of the incubators and accelerators to help support and strengthen entrepreneurial ideas?
Yeah, definitely. So thanks for having me here today. I guess what we're trying to create is these conditions that the previous speakers were talking about. So how do you bring together people who have those qualities that make them a bit kind of crazy, and myself included, to try and change things on a mass scale in a way that is completely kind of transforming industries and people's lives. So we've done a few things that I think, and again, we're still experimenting, so we'll see what happens. We've been going on for 2 years, but have some successes so far. So the first thing is to have a mission-led approach, which I think you're all here for that today. So I think that should be covered for you. But what we've discovered is if you try to solve everything for everyone, it becomes a bit overwhelming. People feel disempowered. People don't know where to start and what to do. Whereas if you give them a sharp, specific mission, and also I guess within kind of Reload, you can start thinking about specific elements, which is it about the education of younger people? Is it about helping people who've lost their jobs or the elderly? Is it about, different elements? So within the context of the bigger picture, what is the specific mission that gives that sharpness and focus? So every program we run 9 months program. And every program has a specific mission. Our first one was women's and girls' emotional and mental health. And now we've just kicked off the second one around the impact of automation and globalization on places and why they're left behind and how we can help people who live in those places. So that sharpness, that mission helps draw in the talent as well as the ecosystem around it. So the second part of what we do is provide the conditions and the ecosystem that is made of the entrepreneurs, so those crazy people who are willing to relocate, to leave everything, to leave well-paid jobs, relocate their families in order to start a business. So you need that side of it. But I think, as you've said also, you need the community, you need the ecosystem. We've seen in Lisbon, we know we have it in Israel. You need the capital, you need the academic partners. So we have a lot of partnership with the LSE, who's one of our funders, with Imperial, with other schools and universities. You need that kind of input in terms of evidence-based work, what works. You need creative talent, so you need to work with people who are in the creative industries. Again, if you think about London specifically, you have all of those in the mix. And so creating those conditions that once the ideas come to life, it's easier to scale them, it's easier to test them. So this is kind of the first part of it. And I think the second part that we do is not just creating the conditions, it's helping people test them quickly. So having that mindset of, are we really solving a big problem? So setting the ambition, the mission, but then go and speak to users, speak to people as quickly as you can by prototyping. So we ask people to not just sit in a room and have idea, but actually take that idea and make it something real and start testing and getting feedback. Is it something people really love? Would they engage with it? Would they want to pay for it eventually? So these are kind of the things that we're trying to do with Zinc. So we bring 50 people for 9 months, find the craziest people, surround them with people who can help them, then take their crazy ideas, test them, and then scale them.
Mm-hmm. So if I turn from essentially an organization that tries to cover the market failure, as it were, or the institutional failure, because if you think about what the incubators or the accelerators, and there's different sort of flavors and varieties, they essentially cover a gap that was apparent, that required some community. And let me go a little bit more provocatively now to you, Francisco, because in theory, your shop and ours should be the ones that would be sorting out this problem. Business schools are supposed to help bridge the needs of people who want to develop their businesses with all of the resources that they have in order to make them work. So if you start from, the institutional vantage point, and you think about how you are trying to cover the need, not fully. Some people may need to be supported by Zinc or by other incubators and accelerators, and we'll try to figure out why. But what is it that you guys are doing in order to support and develop it, and what's changing? Imperial is an interesting case study in that regard. Could you share a little bit about what's going on?
Thank you very much, first, Michael, for the invitation to be here, share some thoughts. And I'll talk mostly about four elements that I think are quite important. And I'll contrast some of what happens at Imperial with Portugal. As Michael noted, I was the Dean of Catholic Lisbon School of Business and Economics from 2012 to 2017. So very much, coming off the crisis, the economic crisis that affected dramatically in Portugal as well as Greece, meaning, and drawing some parallels around that. And so these are what I would call talent, opportunity, experimentation, and community. And you'll see that those are present in very different ways if you think about Portugal, if you think about Imperial College. Let me talk first about talent. Talent is came up very clearly in the first panel, and it's quite significant. You need these talented people to drive, the entrepreneurial system. And of course, the vantage points and the starting points are very different. At Imperial, one of the fantastic advantages that we have is that Imperial is an amazing magnet for talent at all levels. So that is a fundamental force that creates a really strong basis for the entrepreneurial endeavor around Imperial. Of course, that's very different when you think about Lisbon or Portugal in terms of it's not the same magnet. But what was very significantly changed with the economic crisis in terms of the talent is what I would say is the availability of talent towards the entrepreneurial drive that changed dramatically with the economic crisis. If you think about the graduates of Católica, the school that I was the dean of for 5 years, most of them had sure jobs in consulting, in telecom, in banking, whatever. But what happened is that starting in 2008, they realized that those opportunities were bogus for them to build their careers. The banks were all failed, the telecom firms were shrinking. A lot of the sectors where they got jobs were not growing a lot. There were no opportunities. And so they started to figure out, why am I going into this? Even if I get a job, it's not going to be useful for my career. So both at the technical schools as well as at the business schools, the availability of talent towards entrepreneurial drive changed dramatically with the economic crisis. And that, I see, is a very fundamental difference that happened and is very valuable in Portugal as it is in Greece. And it is very important that we realize that, and that then we work around the other elements that I'll mention briefly to try to leverage this net talent. Now, in Portugal, one thing that was already mentioned was also quite important, is the government did a lot to try to create a magnet for talent, not only the local one, but to attract people, VCs, investors, mentors. And that involved, for example, startup visa. It involved, for example, the non-habitual resident status that creates a very nice resident status, especially for people that are VCs that work around on the capital side. So a lot of other things to change that talent pool. But so very different starting points, but both quite different. Let me talk about the second, which is the opportunity. One of the, I think, very interesting things that's happening with today's day and age and digitalization is that opportunity is there. No matter where you're here in the UK and in Imperial, or in Portugal, or in Greece, in very fundamental ways, right? How on earth would you think that the leading, cloud-based, basically call center firm, which is TalkDesk, which has just broken the 1 billion unicorn status, came out of Portugal? The leading, at the moment, startup that's doing fraud detection for banks, in the US and around the world is out of Portugal, right? That company was created at the moment that the Portuguese banking system had collapsed and was bailed out by the EU, right? The same thing, one of the leading translation platforms is coming out of Portugal called Unbabel, right? What I mean about this is that the way that digitization in particular, but a variety of other transformations are happening, means that these talented opportunities can come out of anywhere, including Portugal, and certainly including Greece. And I don't think that they're slowing down. Certainly with blockchain and fintech, a lot of other interesting things are opening up. And I think there is a very big opportunity for new ecosystems like the Portuguese or the Greeks to really sprung up. Now, what we started to realize also on the Imperial side is that when we talk about this opportunity, and this gets to the third point, which is experimentation, is that we provided almost no support for anything that would go beyond the the own IP that Imperial owned until about 5 years ago. I met an entrepreneur from Imperial that graduated 5 years, and he said, when I graduated, I tried to start up a company and there was nothing there. Now we have an advanced hack space where anybody at Imperial can experiment. We have basically an enterprise lab. We have an incubator. Next year, we're going to have a scale space. And in the next 5 years, we're going to have a whole region, which is White City, all completely oriented towards the promotion of entrepreneurship and innovation. It's basically a space as big as our campus in South Kensington, but that Imperial is all transforming around the entrepreneurial innovation drive. And it's going to be completely different and rather unique. And it's all about this experimentation, which is this third factor. You need to create the opportunity for people to experiment. This is at Imperial. In Portugal was the same. Técnico, the leading engineering school, as well as the engineering school in Porto, and Católica, my school, we started to create much more opportunities for the students to experiment, to fail fast, to do things. And that's the third element that you really have to promote in important ways. And also on the public side, Portugal government started Portugal Social Innovation, talking about the social part, which has had a major impact in putting Portugal at the leading edge of social innovation. For example, they created Startup Lisbon, another space to innovate a lot of different things. Experimentation is key. And the last, very briefly, is community. I mean, just like the VCs and the mentors that came, the international links that came, it's very, very critical for any of these entrepreneurial communities to be successful. And so every opportunity that you have to do this here, and that's why, I came here very gladly, because these links are important to foster these opportunities and these strong connections. In the previous panel, they mentioned, how many doors the successful entrepreneurs had to knock on to be successful. And it's not the number, but it's also the diversity, because you need to match between the interests and the drive of the entrepreneur and also a VC or a supporter that believes in that particular idea. And that festers and fosters and works within the heterogeneity of preferences, ideas, visions for the future. And so creating this diverse community is really, really critical. And it's critical for Imperial, and it's critical for Lisbon, or it's critical for Greece.
So I hear a couple of things that could be optimistic, like the fact that not only at the national level, significant change leads to opportunity because clever people understand that they can no longer keep their own trajectories, but as sectors evolve, as technologies evolve, clearly you have the possibility of reallocating, reorganizing. I also hear the potential value from an increasingly globalized economy where the important ventures that came out of Lisbon were not Lisbon focused. They were not, your mom and pop souvlaki franchises or those mom and pop souvlaki shops that turned into franchises. Grigoris has a limit, and it's probably reached it. And that takes us to what we can do with that, and that's part of the Greek challenge. So, Papastergiou, let me come to you, because one of the problems that we see is this idea that if we get, especially the public sector, to collaborate well with the private sector, and the examples here that we heard, including from the ones in Lisbon, let alone what may be happening here, current political dysfunction notwithstanding, is that there is the desire of taking the energy and the potential that exists, the opportunities that can be not only local but also global, and helping them be created. The previous panel already suggested that things are not so easy in Greece, and that the difference between Estonia, Lisbon, and Athens is that we're still stuck in a bureaucratic process. So, a double question for you. First of all, despite the fact that you are in the midst of an administration, you need to deal with central government and you've got all the local political pressures from local government, you were able to advance. What do you think allowed you to push ahead, and what do you think are the key bottlenecks that if we want to be more progressive, as both Francisco and Ella suggested, are keeping us back from being able to achieve it? What do you think we can make of it?
What I lived the last 4 years, I can tell you, the last 4 years that I'm a mayor of the city. The first of all is that in Greece we still have objections about many things. The second solution or issue is that we don't want to eliminate the state. We want the state to be everywhere and to control everything. Telling you the truth, sometimes young people cannot stand waiting for new things happen. That's why they're leaving the country. For example, the time that we have to spend from the moment that we have the study to make the public tender and to make the agreement with the constructor is more than 10 months. It reaches 1 year. In a moment that Greece wants to speed up, there's always bureaucracy that keeps us back. So we have to take the very brave decision to give a lot of responsibilities to local authorities. We don't believe in local authorities. We are not so local and so authorities because we have all the time the hand like that to the central government asking for money. So we have first of all to persuade ourselves that we can make it. Second, we have to persuade the citizens that now it is the next day, it's a new page for Greece, where the local authorities can make the difference, can make the change. And second and thirdly, you have to engage the citizens to follow your vision. But the most critical is to have a vision, and this vision cannot stop to next elections. Have a horizon of many years, of next generations, and not just next elections.
Mm-hmm. Well, and unfortunately, some of these problems are problems that are endemic and have gone on for a long time. So let me turn to our other two panelists in the knowledge of these structural issues that exist in Greece and the fact that, unfortunately, the polity finds it very hard to reform. Perhaps we could have a direction towards change if we started measuring and assessing mayors by what they did, and we started looking at different cities and comparing them to Trikala or to any other municipalities, and if we had a measure of assessing the inputs as well. For so many kilos of inputs, how many kilos of outputs did you get in education, in health, in security, in environment, and whatever it is that you're responsible with? We're not there yet. So given that we're not there yet, I would like to turn to our other two panelists to ask you what you think for all the problems. And Greece does have structural problems, and we do have an important amount of work that we need to do changing the administration. It would take a whole conference to speak only about that. So let's take these as given, and let's see what it is from what you have seen in institutional environments that are perhaps imperfect that you can take away and that might be useful in terms of better leveraging the resources here, without saying that the state needs to change mentality. Let's see bottom up what it is that we can do and what we can draw from what you have seen, whether in Imperial or in Católica and in Lisbon. I know that you're also in the advisory board of Moedas and thinking at the EU level. What is it that we can do that may have an impact?
Well, I agree very much with the mayor about the power of the local environment. I think if I think about, I mean, in that regards, I think for the example of Greece, I think in some senses Portugal is closer to Greece than the UK and London in terms of the constraint. I mean, we have other issues here in the UK and London, as we all know. But from the point of view, I think of your remarks, I think that the Portuguese context is more valuable, and in that sense, some of the most interesting examples are precisely at the local level, and let me give you 2 or 3 of these, because, for example, on the social innovation example that I gave, the Portugal Social Innovation Program, which became a national program, really had its incubator in Cascais, which is the small town that I'm originally from, near Lisbon, about 25 kilometers of Lisbon, and this is the local mayor office, with a couple of people, some of them academics. In fact, one of the person that was behind that was at that time an academic at INSEAD, head of the social innovation program at INSEAD, but he was from Portugal. And he worked with the local mayor in Cascais to start a local social innovation program that then was very successful there and actually became an example that then was used at the national level to set up a national program. One of the things that I think was more interesting about the development of this entrepreneurial ecosystem in Portugal is a little bit the competition between the cities. So we thought we can think about the central government and what the central government can and often cannot do. I would say that a lot of the most interesting developments that happen in promoting the entrepreneurial community in Portugal happened at the local level, at, for example, the city of Lisbon, but also the competition that you start to have between cities. And so, the one important step, for example, in Lisbon was the creation of Startup Lisbon. And so this was taking advantage of the vacant buildings because of the big drop in economic activity and the big drop in prices of basically office space in Lisbon. The mayor of Lisbon created this incubator space because he had a bunch of vacant buildings. He knew that nobody was going to be renting those anytime soon. So just created a big incubator right at the center of Lisbon and created a new life there. And some of these activities that started to develop, and then, Porto started to look at that and said, okay, well, if they're doing that, we need to do something more about that. And then Coimbra was also, okay, we also have this incubator, we need to do more things. So I actually think that, especially because of the entrepreneurial, that tends to be much more organic, much more community-driven, I do feel that it's better to assume, as you were saying, that you can write off the central government and try to see what you can do, because then that eventually may pick it up and really bring something that can be more valuable.
I want to echo that, because for us, it's exactly the approach we're taking. So we're looking for the talent, the people who have amazing ambition. So I think building on evidence from communities, but thinking scale from day one. So people who are thinking on a national, global level. So people who are not thinking about just the one community, but they're going to learn from the one community, understand what are the elements that work, and try to develop a solution that is scalable. So that's one. Definitely bypassing anything with public sector and government. So think of it as, just for the sake of it, the enemy, in the sense that you want to solve things in a way that don't rely on that. Then collaborate. I'm not suggesting they are, and we are collaborating, but for kind of bringing people together, you need that kind of sense of someone to fight against, and I think that competition, and even in a way the trauma, Nico and Krista were referring to, this is the trauma we're in now, and how do we actually overcome it, how do we get out of it, so use that as a way to mobilize. But as you say, don't rely on anyone else but yourselves, and then create, and I think you have that, so you have the talent, as you said, people losing jobs, people looking for their future. You have the cheap kind of resources to do that. So it's really connecting those dots and giving people a direction, which is in many cases anti-something, that will help them kind of do that, and connecting them globally. So I think, again, the other thing that people didn't have 20, 30 years ago is the global connectivity. So we have people in London, we have people in Lisbon, we have people who've done it in other places, in Tel Aviv. How do you create an ecosystem that actually supports it and thinks about it from day one? So I think design for scalability and connectivity with whatever you do. Otherwise, it'll end up, even if it is successful, being quite small scale and therefore not impactful. So how do you design that global reach and scalability from the outset?
Terrific. So
just a small point related to this. I mean, this scalability element, I just want to echo that in a very important way, because some of these examples that I gave about Portugal and some of these successful drive, I mean, they all had a very clear ambition to be big, to be global. So, I mean, it's not worthwhile to look at something that has a Greek ambition or a regional ambition, right? Be it a social, initiative, or a for-profit initiative, or a hybrid initiative. I mean, the global ambition, the scaling ambition, really has to be there, and it doesn't matter where you're starting from, and that's something that I just wanted to echo, because I think it's quite important.
Terrific. So we've gone from the excitement and the excitement with change to the deep concern about all these things that have plagued the Greek administration and the way that the institutions work in Greece and the lack of connection, back to excitement with the possibility of this void being filled by bottom-up efforts of people who do take global ambition and try to create focused areas where different institutions, whether they are business schools, whether they are cities, whether they are incubators, whether they are groups of people who can find some common purpose, can actually drive change. Now, we probably have time for one or two questions. Let's see whether we've got one or two questions, take them together, and see whether a pithy set of answers exist. So there's one here, let me see, and there's another one all the way at the back. Fine, we'll take three, and then the lady in the middle to get a bit of gender balance. Yes?
Following, my name is Dimitris from Goldner University. Following Professor Veloso's thinking about how Cascais actually went on to influence the whole Portugal, I'd like to ask the mayor, why you differ? Why you're not a political animal? And how can the other guys, the other mayors, can come and start imitating you towards bringing smartness into the country?
Let's hold the question. Let's go to the other two questions, and we'll try to answer them all together, not to exceed our time too much. Marco, it's all the way at the end, all the way at the end of the, or yeah, let's start with the second question. Here, the lady here, and then all the way at the end. Yes, there.
Hi there. My question is for the mayor as well. You talked about having a great team. So I'm wondering, with the reputation that public servants sometimes have in Greece, how did you manage to do that, and what difficulties did you face?
Okay, and the final question, all the way at the end, gentleman there. You say your name too?
Is again for the mayor and also relevant to the comment of Mr. Veloso about the competition of the cities. I'm wondering if other Greek cities approach the Trikala and the mayor to understand why this was success and how to do it and replicate or learn from this success. And also if there was if you felt that there is any competition like as happened in Portugal among the cities that they would like to compete.
Terrific.
If there was approach in the beginning.
So, bottom up, yeah.
I'm trying to answer to all the questions. First of all, I don't believe that we are doing something different. As I was telling you, I do believe that we do just the obvious, but this is the missing in Greece right now. It is obvious that you don't have to smoke indoors. But why? There is a law the last 10 years, but nobody follows it. Okay.
Tell that, Mr. Polakis.
This is the obvious one. Okay, Mr. Polakis, who is working in the parliament. Okay. It is obvious that you have to open new initiatives, for example, for the growth. But I see every day people live in Trikala, just like Yorgos, Martina, other guys from Trikala that are today here. But have to see which the critical advantages of your region. For example, as I told you, the private sector as far as the herbs. It is obvious that you have to find those signs and those advantages and make them grow. And of course, to get out of your city, start talking about the city, start make collaborations. We don't have such a culture in Greece. We are, all the institutions are silos. I don't want to collaborate with the university because the university will steal the fame. I don't want to collaborate with other cities for the same reason. No, that's totally wrong way. And if the last 80 years or 40 years we didn't see what went wrong, I think that the game is lost. So open your boundaries, open your borders, open your minds, and start collaborating. This is the point for me. And of course, not to think all the time about the political cost. Because if your vision is just to close 1,000 of potholes or change 1,000 of lamps, I'm telling to my citizens that if in a magical way, tomorrow morning, all the potholes will be closed and repaired, and all of the lamps will be changed, you will find the job to do. No, I prefer to have roads like the ones we have all in Greece, but to start initiatives in a different way. Okay, it needs time to persuade them, but as I tell you, it's the vision that makes a difference.
Competition between cities and systems at work. Francisco, last closing thoughts.
I think that can be very valuable. I mean, the competition does not to be seen in a negative way, right? I think it's much more about the examples that then demonstrate and show that it's possible. So it's not competition in a negative way, especially on the entrepreneurial side, that you can see, oh, you know, I'm going to lose if that one is going to win. It tends to be much more if that can be done, in a small town, Cascais, or if it happens in Lisbon, then I'm sure it can be done in Porto, because the people in Lisbon are no better than the Porto people. So it's much more this demonstration element that it's possible that I think makes a huge difference. And the same thing here at Imperial. I mean, as I mentioned to you, I think until 5 years ago, Imperial was mostly caring about its own IP. But about 5 years, it started to change and to basically support all the entrepreneurial community and the ideas. And so because it is a magnet for talent, that has sprung up very, very rapidly and in very interesting ways. And an important part of that is precisely because, the students see the other students. So this is true at the individual level, as it is true at the city or country level, that you can see that it's possible. So it's competition, but more from the point of view of the demonstration effect. Like, if they can do it, I think we can do it as well.
Well, so where do good ideas come from? All over the place. And I think that what we heard here is that we should not expect any central agency to come and reward them, that it's going to be a bottom-up effort to try to instigate change. And we need to not look inside, but look outside and think about the externalities. And what I'll conclude on is what Francisco just said, the fact that the sea change, the idea that we should not only be focusing in our own narrow venture, but the impact that it will have, which is very consistent with the message of Reload overall. Another thing that is consistent is that there's a heck of a lot of good thing that needs to follow. So we need to see the chess stage in order to proceed, but please join me in thanking this panel for a terrific presentation.